Hey YouTubes, good day, God bless. Today I'm going to show you 100% proof of how you can know that the Quran is not from God, not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that Muhammad is not a prophet of God, not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, if we look in the book of Matthew, chapter 22, verses 34 through 40, they read, "But when the Pharisees had heard that he," speaking of Jesus, "had put the Sadducees to silence, they were gathered together." Now, when you read the Gospels, you'll see that the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the elders, basically, they're constantly asking Jesus questions about the law to try to trip him up in his words so that they can use his words against him. So they'll ask him questions about it in the hopes that he'll make a mistake, but he never does. So by this point, the Sadducees have given up. The Pharisees basically figure they're going to try it one last time. So they basically send a lawyer to ask Jesus a question to tempt him to see if he'll make a mistake. And this is what it says. The lawyer asked Jesus, "Master, which is the great commandment in the law?" Jesus said unto him, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment." Now, this was pretty obvious because any Jew would have known the answer to this. It's called the Shema. It's the first commandment, and it's the greatest commandment. You're supposed to love God basically with all your being. So Jesus quotes the Torah. He quotes Moses, and he says, basically you need to love God. Then he says the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So, Jesus is quoting Moses in the Torah, and we can look in the Torah and see where Moses says this stuff. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 5, the Shema. Moses writes, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might." So Jesus is quoting this as the greatest commandment, the first and greatest commandment. Then Jesus quotes Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, where he says, "Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord." So Jesus is saying that everything hinges, the law, the Torah, all the prophets, everything hinges on these two commandments. And you have Moses who wrote them, so they're in the Torah. Now you have Jesus who is talking about them in the gospel. Now, if you look in the Quran, if the Quran is from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then these two commandments should be in the Quran, because the entire law and all the prophets hinge on it. Everything is based on loving God with all your being and loving your neighbor as yourself, meaning loving other human beings, treating people the way you want to be treated. Everything in life, everything hinges on these two commandments given directly by Yahweh God. However, if you search the Quran, you will not find these two commandments. I challenge any Muslim to go through the Quran and find where it says that thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, because you clearly have Moses writes it in the Torah. Here it is, Leviticus 19:18. You have Jesus who says it in the Gospel, Matthew 22:39. So, if the Quran is from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, if Muhammad is a prophet of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the Quran should have these two commandments, but it doesn't have both these commandments in it. Like I said, I challenge any Muslim to search the scriptures in the Quran and find this commandment. And if everything hinges, if the entire law and all the prophets, everything hinges on these two commandments, then if your Quran doesn't have them, it's not from Yahweh God. It's not from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's 100% proof. Okay? You have it right here. Jesus says it exactly. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Moses, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Find that in the Quran. And if you can't, and when you can't, you'll know that the Quran is not from God and Muhammad is not a prophet. Good day, and God bless.